Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Dr. David Palmer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you just start us off by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I think my most proud fact is I am the dad of 6 neurodivergent kids. So that's pretty amazing when you think my oldest is 33 and my youngest is 13. So wide range.
Yeah.
The youngest 5 are adopted, and
Okay.
so we learned a lot about inclusion and through just raising our kids. And as most of them came into our home when they were either out of the hospital or very young,
Sure.
we were very grateful that they were overall physically healthy. But as they got older, we began to notice some things that were that we didn't understand at first. We
Mhm.
were thinking, okay, why is one of our girls screaming every time we comb her hair? Or why is my son having such a difficult time with reading? And then learning more and educating ourselves about our kids and how we could support their strengths as well as advocate for them at home, at school, with insurance companies, with really every doctors, everybody, just to make sure that they were getting what they needed and could be
Mhm.
included in everything that they deserve to be included in. And so at the same time, I've been in education for, gosh, now started teaching in 1995. So I've done teaching, done administration,
Sure.
and really didn't understand the impact of neurodivergence on students. I taught high school science. So a lot of it was I pretty much went along with the traditional views that kids that were
Mhm.
acting out in school were just wanting to be naughty. They wanted to be get the attention to themselves. They were lazy, unmotivated, whatever. And it wasn't until raising our little ones, things started clicking in my own head. And that's when I decided, you know what, I want to dedicate my life to education, teaching not only teachers and students, but also parents, practitioners, whoever, about the impact of neurodivergence, all of its glories and wonders and all that comes with it, but also all of the challenges and needs for support. And it was when I started in 2019, my doctoral program, that I really even considered this word inclusion. And
Hmm.
that set me on a path of just changing my life. And then in the midst of that, being diagnosed myself with ADHD, because I always knew that there was
Mhm.
something going on. Why was I always walking around when I talked on the telephone? Or why could I not get certain tasks started? And how come I could like hyper focus on something to the point of spending hours and hours trying to figure it out?
Mhm.
And I didn't think anything of it growing up because I wasn't the quote unquote hyper boy, the
Mhm.
typical stereotypical boy, who's always jumping off the and getting in trouble in school. It was not any of that. But as I began to delve into my own story and finding out things like, oh, there's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria. That's partly why I'm a people pleaser,
Mhm.
and combine that with some pretty severe bullying when I was a kid and assault and things like that by my peers. It all kind of came together into what I'm doing now with Rewire the Response.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. So you said 2019 was when you first started thinking about inclusion, and if I'm doing math, so that was like 24 years after you started teaching.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
I taught in private school, so
Okay.
there was never we didn't have, special education services or
Yeah.
anything like
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Interesting. What is your doctorate in?
So my doctorate is in special education curriculum and instruction. So I actually was going to start a doctoral program in education, focusing on secondary education because I was a high school teacher.
Sure.
And then one day, right before I started my classes, it hit me. It's like, well, why am I doing secondary education? Special education is where my story is and where my heart is. And
Sure.
so then I called the university. I said, can I just change my emphasis to special education? They're like, yeah, of course, no problem. And so that's what I did.
That's great. What is your definition of inclusion?
My definition of inclusion has probably changed a lot since starting to study, special education in
Mm-hmm.
particular. I come to think of inclusion a little bit more than just being included. We have the term inclusion because we have the term exclusion, and we wouldn't need to be talking about inclusion if people weren't excluded for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So inclusion is important, but when I was training teachers at the job I was before this one, I would talk about the difference even between inclusion and belonging. So I always gave the example of if you are invited you, Aaron, on our family trip, right? I can say, hey, Aaron, we're going to go take a road trip. We're going to see all these tremendous sites. We're going to do all these different things. Want to come along with us? And you go, sure, that sounds great. If we included you in everything, you'd get to go to all the places we go to. You can go to the theme parks, you can go to the national parks and all of that. But I think a step further, and what we're really after when we talk about inclusion, is the sense of authentic belonging. So it's not just, hey, you get to go to the theme parks and you get to ride in the car and that, but now if you belong, okay, you're going to have responsibilities as a member of the family. You're going to be treated equally as a member of the family. So when we talk about inclusion, at least in my context in public education, sometimes inclusion means, oh, we'll just have them sitting in a general education class for 80% of the day while spend 20% in resource or whatever. But to me, if a child is truly included in a general education class, they need to be an equal member and they need to be able to participate and have community and be valued, and their strengths need to be and their assets need to be demonstrated and used for the betterment of others. The areas they have challenges in or need to stretch in, those are being supported as they are part of the community. So to me, inclusion is belonging to the community as a full-fledged equal member as anybody else, regardless of strengths, stretches, struggles, challenges, whatever.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Like growing up, did you have any exposure to like people with disabilities or neurodivergence that you can remember looking back?
Growing up, I just remember because I started kindergarten in 1977, so that's been a while ago. And I just remember any students with disabilities were usually in a separate setting. And it usually was more physical disabilities or students who had maybe Down syndrome or other intellectual disabilities. So it was no inclusion. Like it was 100% separation, exclusion, segregation. And so, and those kids, as we would say, those kids were usually in classrooms that were far removed. They never were included in our PE classes or any of that. So even though I think we've come a long way in understanding inclusion, it's interesting because in my doctoral studies, I would have to watch videos from the 1990s, and they were talking about inclusion and what the ideal inclusion was. And my heart just broke because I'm like, okay, this is 20, 30 years later, and we're really not, we're a little farther and that, but even with IDEA, we haven't had an update on that in 20 years. And so I think we've come a long way, but we have a real long way to go in understanding true inclusion.
Yeah. So yeah, my story is I have a daughter. Her name is Cecilia. She's 22, and at 3 months old, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and then cerebral palsy. So she was, the school got involved with like early intervention stuff. And then my inclusion story starts when she went to, I think she was probably in kindergarten. And I mean, I don't recall hearing the word disability growing up, don't know anything about it. So she's born, school gets involved. And I mean, I just, you go along with what they're saying because I don't know anything myself, so go along with it. And because of her needs, she was sent to a segregated classroom across town, um, from where we lived. And I went to lunch, just stopped in at lunchtime one day, and the other kids in her classroom were folding towels and spreading paper. And I mean, like I said, she was in kindergarten, first grade, and I was like, why are these kids already? I mean, why are they not listening? At least in the math class, at a minimum,
Mhm.
listen, in those settings. And found out about inclusion. So I mean, she was born in 2002, so we're talking 2007, 8,
Mhm.
and just because she was classified as severely multiply impaired, used a wheelchair, she was sent to that segregated setting
Mhm.
then. So I mean, it's yeah, the stuff that we came across. I mean, since she's been alive, it's like you're saying. I mean, all the laws were passed decades before this. Why is this stuff still happening? So it's very
Yep.
interesting how some places are further ahead than others for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, how can parents or teachers tell the difference between defiance and dysregulation, and why does that distinction change everything?
Defiance and dysregulation. So this became very apparent to me a couple years ago. I was doing some advocacy work
Mhm.
and kept hearing the educators in the room talk about a first grade student who was being so willfully defiant. And when he was told to do something, he wouldn't do it or get
Mhm.
upset and leave the room. And so the educators in the room had this idea, philosophy, mindset that if a child doesn't listen or do what they're told or comply, then it has to be willful defiance. They're choosing to not do something. My role in supporting the parents in that situation was to dig a little deeper and to say, okay, what's going on beneath the surface? Because, like an iceberg, we're only seeing 10% of
Yeah.
what's going on. There's 90% that it's our job as the adults in the room to investigate, and are there feelings of the student not, does he not feel safe? Does he not feel connected? Does he not feel included? Does he not feel like there's certain nervous system needs that are being met? So dysregulation comes from the idea that our nervous systems are wired for primarily for survival, for surviving and thriving. And so anytime a student or an adult feels they are not in a safe place and there's that need to survive, then our nervous system is going to kick in and we're either going to combat what we feel is threatening us, whether it's real or perceived, we're going to run away from it, or we're just going to shut down. And so that's a lot different than defiance, which is I'm not going to do this because I don't want to. So I never say that children are never defiant because I know there are times when my child and sometimes me, I just say, I don't want to do it. And I just don't want to do it. But even then, if I stop and think, what is it about that's prompted that response? A
Mhm.
lot of times we're going to see that it's a nervous system response, it's a survival response. So for parents and for teachers, before we get to that place where we're labeling kids as defiant and suspending them and expelling them, it's our job to first say, okay, what's going on beneath the surface? Is there any kind of sense in this individual that they need to kick in survival mode? Because those same instincts, if they feel safe, those same instincts of fight, flight, or freeze can actually help us thrive. So we're in an environment where we really feel that we're safe and that we are connected and we are being cared for. I always say seen, safe, and supported. So if I feel I'm seen, safe, and supported, then those same fight, flight, or freeze can actually be very important things to help me thrive. And so fighting could help me in a competition. If I'm in the Olympics or I'm in chess club or I'm playing in a piano recital or whatever, those same nervous system feelings can actually be very helpful. So defiance, willful, probably a small percent of the time, and even then, it's probably driven by some sense of nervous system dysregulation.
Thank you for that clarification. What's the biggest myth about discipline that's keeping families and classrooms stuck in survival mode?
I think the biggest myth is defiance. And so if I come at it and seeing that a child is being defiant, then my discipline is going to focus on compliance. So I'm going to try to change behaviors to get behaviors to match my expectations. And usually traditionally we use two ways to do that, right? We either reward good behavior or we punish bad behavior. So if you come at it from the perspective that a child is being defiant, then you're going to choose compliance, and you're going to choose either you're going to choose to try to dangle the carrot, or you're going to have a bigger stick. And so that whole philosophy does not regard the nervous system. And in the end, it can do more damage. It can further traumatize a child, where, like me, growing up in that system, it led me to be a people pleaser. So I would do anything to get your approval, not only to escape punishment, which was a big part of it, but also I would want your approval because that's how that need for connection and safety was felt by me. So if we discipline that way externally, yeah, we're gonna run into a lot of problems. You may get compliance in the short term, but you're not going to get it in the long term. But when you look at nervous system and focus on regulation, which for kids, they need a regulated adult to help and model and teach them how to regulate, then you're actually building connection, right? You're actually building relationship. You're actually changing lives in very positive ways.
Yeah, love that. You talk about rewiring the response. What does that mean, and how can adults start doing it in real time when a child is melting down?
So I really started thinking about this idea of rewiring, hearing over and over again this fancy term neuroplasticity, which just means that our brains, even as we're older, can be rewired and we're never like stuck. And learning more about growth mindset, which is a huge thing. As a teacher, you want your kids to have a growth mindset. And as a teacher, I need to have a growth mindset. That whole growth mindset comes from the idea that our brains can actually be changed for the better. So that's the rewire. And rewire the response is we've got to think about how we are going to respond to a child's behavior versus react. So if we react to it, we're typically going to react in a way that's, again, not very healthy, not very helpful. So I started out trying to coach students with executive functions and try to rewire their brains, and then finding out that a lot of the executive functions come down to nervous system regulation, and trying to teach kids how to emotionally regulate and not teach their parents was starting to get counterproductive. And I was spending more time talking to the parents about what they should be doing and all of that. So then I said, okay, I'm going to switch it. So now my emphasis is on rewire the response of the adults and teach them through a system, a framework that helps them to do that. And so that's based on, I call it the 6 E's. And those E's have to do with beginning to embrace, to engage with the child first, enhance the environment, and then you're in a place where you can equip, empower, and then they can begin to embody their purpose and resilience. So that's how it looks. And so, to start out with, and I shared this at a recent TEDx talk I did, is just using the acronym CALM, CALM, which is we center ourselves first, we affirm the storm we see in front of us, we lead with regulation, compassion, and empathy, and then we meet those nervous system needs first.
Yeah, that's
but
great.
It starts with us.
Yeah, for sure. As you were talking about that, I don't know if this is, but this popped into my head of where you have your kid like falls and they ding their knee or whatever, and like if you as a parent or like just overreact, like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Your leg's gonna fall off, versus like just having that much more calm response. I as a parent, I know that that's the calm response that that kind of brings maybe the survival, those things down for the kid too. So is that kind of what you're talking about? And that's a simple version of it, but something like that where how I'm reacting, or if I don't get amped up as well in the situation, that kind of helps out.
Absolutely, 100%. So it's not only, oh my gosh, your leg's gonna fall, but a lot of times I hear the blame is put back on the kid. Like, well,
Oh,
if you were
yeah,
keeping up with me, or if you weren't walking so slow, if you
right.
were watching where you were walking,
Yeah,
those kinds of things.
yeah,
So it's not only refraining from that, but when the child does fall, it's giving a felt sense of safety. So it's
right.
not only our words, but actually, 97% or 93%, I think they say, of what we communicate is nonverbal, right? And so
Right,
even just stooping down, helping them up,
right.
holding them, maybe hugging them is, oh, I can see this really, really hurts. Sometimes we can just even ask, does this hurt more on the outside or on the inside? Because sometimes kids feel more embarrassed because they fell. Maybe they think a lot of people are looking at them or whatever. So you're bringing them into this space of saying, I want you to feel this shared experience that I deeply love you. I care for you. I care about what happens for you, and we can work through this together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Not like, quit being such a crybaby. It's not that bad or whatever. Those things just don't work.
Well, I'm 48, so I was born in 77. So yeah, like I heard the just suck it up.
Yep. Suck it up,
Like
buttercup.
no, like trying to talk through it or like whatever,
No,
work through the emotions that are coming up. Just like stop crying. You can. It's not. Yeah. Do you want me
it's
to
not that
give you
bad.
something to cry? Do you want me to give you something to cry about, or like those?
I heard that a lot growing up.
Yeah.
So
Can you
now
share
it's,
us? Go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say, it led to a lot of years of emotional constipation and
Yes.
therapy, and still
Right.
trying to figure out how to process what's gone on in my body 53
Yes.
years later or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
And my parents were wonderful. So they
Yeah.
supported, they
Yep.
cared for us, but they just parented the way they were parented in that
Yeah.
generation. So,
Yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. And it's yeah. I'm still working through things now. It's like something pops up, and you're like, man, that happened like 40 years ago, but it's still affecting me.
yep.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yep. Constant.
Can you share a real story of transformation where a parent or teacher shifted their response and saw a completely different outcome?
Yeah. I have a lot of stories. I guess I could share one about a teacher a couple years ago who was struggling in a classroom and with a particular student. As we've come out of COVID, it seems, I don't know if it really is, but it just seems like it's a lot harder to be a teacher. And so they were struggling, particularly with a student, to the point where there was just these constant clashes and power struggles. And this was with older students, fourth, fifth graders. And I would try to input a little bit, respecting boundaries and that. But eventually the teacher came into me and said, I know you've talked about this, you've kind of dropped these hints. Can you help? So what really happened was just building small points of connection. So I would
Mhm.
encourage the teacher, find out something about the student that is not maybe school related. Do they have any kind of
Right.
hobbies or interest or any of that? And as they've done that, um, the walls kind of start to break down. And this teacher was able to build a strong relationship, which then led to an openness to be taught, which then led to, changes in their behavior and that. And I've had that experience myself as a special education teacher the
Mm-hmm.
last few years, where for me, a lot of the kids come in and they're already defeated because they've been in the education system now for 5 or 6 years. And it's kind of the same thing every year. And so when I find a place of connection, like one student with autism
Mm-hmm.
found a connection through a book, Wings of Fire. A student would not want to do any kind of work in my classroom, and he knew it. And he knew that all the tricks that had been tried on him. So like the
Mm-hmm.
first day, he's like, anything you tell me isn't going to work. It's
Right.
not going to work. You're not going to get me to do anything. And through Wings of Fire and through Pokemon and connections like that,
Yep.
then I get, starts feeling safe enough to trust, and then has enough
Mm-hmm.
courage lended that he can try some math problems, even though he says he's not good at math, but he really is. And so it just, I think the thing though is, Aaron, that it takes time. I think we as adults want our kids to change right away, and
Mm-hmm.
we have to be realistic. It's a long process, and a lot of times it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, but
Yeah.
we as the adults have to be resilient and persistent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, first several years I worked at a residential mental health facility for kids ages like 5 to 18, and I worked kind of on the older boys dorm for a lot of it. So a lot of those kids came in and they liked Magic the Gathering, and I hadn't played it before, but there were several of us that started playing with them. And I mean, you talk about like building the connection. I mean, we started playing Magic the Gathering, so we had something we could do with them to like, build those connections. That makes a huge difference. Like if
Mm-hmm.
they know you're interested and you want to, have
Mm-hmm.
fun with them, it makes a huge difference. And those kids, some of them have been in the, foster care system for over 10 years. They've had a lot of adults treat them horribly, or, they know that eventually everybody's going to leave or hurt them or something. So it takes like, and also, yeah, it takes a while. I mean, just because I played Magic the Gathering with them, one afternoon doesn't mean the next day it's not gonna still go good. It's just like you gotta, and also be consistent. Like just because they act out after, one time of not acting out, you can't change how you're, treating them too. So
Yep, 100%.
yeah, awesome. Um, Many adults feel like they've tried everything and nothing works. What's the first small practical step towards lasting change?
I would say just what you shared. I think the first step to lasting change is
Mhm.
to treat our children as human beings. And I know it
Right.
sounds pretty like simple, but a lot of times we forget that. And so I
Right.
think understanding that even though developmentally they're not they're where we're at, their brains are not developing mentally the same place as we are, especially if they're neurodivergent. I think, we have to get rid of this idea that uh, children are just adults in smaller bodies. They're not. And
Mhm.
so they're humans who are developing, and they have lots of strengths, they have lots of interests and preference, and they have lots of struggles and things that are really hard for them. And so approaching it that way with understanding and empathy, then you can build connections. And I
Mhm.
think the first thing to start with is asking the question, does this child feel seen, safe, and supported? And if not, what's one thing I can do in that area? So if I don't feel like if I perceive they may not feel like they're being seen, then how can I authentically help them being seen? And again, it's maybe authentic praise or just time together. Do they feel safe? Maybe they don't feel safe because every time they do something wrong, my voice goes up. And so I go, okay, I got to start practicing lowering my voice. Do they feel supported? So if I see that they don't feel supported, what can I do to come alongside and help them? I think in our culture today, especially those of us of the older culture, again, we can come at it. Kids today are so entitled and they're always on their devices. And, we always say these things, but we got to stop saying those things and go, okay, how can I support this child? It's not enabling them. It's teaching and modeling them for them. And so just ask yourself in this moment, if I were this child, would I be feeling seen, safe, and supported?
That's great. What is one tip you can share to help the listeners be more inclusive today? So just something anybody can start doing today to be more inclusive.
Sure. When I was starting out my doctoral study, I don't know if you've seen this comic or this cartoon, but it just burned in my head. There's this scene, you would know it well. There's a front of a school, and it's snowing. You know what picture I'm talking about? Yep. And there's the student who's in the wheelchair, and then all the other students are there. And the student asks the janitor who's shoveling, "Could you just clear the ramp?" And of course, the janitor says, "Well, all these other kids are waiting to get the stairs. So when I finish the stairs, I'll get to the ramp." And then I just love what this student in the wheelchair says, but if you shovel the ramp, we all could get in. And so I think the first step of inclusion is whatever you're going to do, design it with everyone in mind. And that's what I teach teachers as well, is that you don't have to have 17 or 30 different lesson plans. Just when you're planning, just consider everybody and have them in mind. And now you can give them all kinds of different on-ramps. So that's what I would say, is that don't say, "Oh, we have to shovel the ramp for this student." No, what is typically good for one student is typically good for all students.
Right. Yeah. That's probably my favorite, picture that you're talking about. Because it seems so simple, but it captures it so well.
Yes.
Plus, I'm from Minnesota, so the snow reference is good.
You get it. I have to drive 2 hours before I see snow. So
yeah. And it's interesting. Just like the same thing with like curb cuts, because my daughter has a wheelchair, so it's the same. Like it's the curb cut helps her, but it also helps other people. Other people that have trouble walking or strollers or pulling luggage around or many things. It's not doesn't just only help her. So it's similar stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Could what I'm going to do or plan, could that potentially exclude somebody? And if it does, then I need to rethink this and make sure everyone is included.
Absolutely. Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
So they can go over to my website, which is drdavidapalmer.com. And I'm also, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn at Dr. David A. Palmer. And I love having conversations. I love just dialoguing about this because it's such an important issue. So even, I offer coaching services and courses and all that, but also just love having conversations and seeing change happen.
Awesome. You said you recently did a TEDx talk?
I did a TEDx Fullerton. It's called Creating Empathetic Responses. I can't remember because they changed the title on me when I already had the title on it. But something along that line, creating empathetic spaces. But you can go on, just do TEDx David Palmer, and it'll come right up.
Awesome.
And it talks exactly for 11 minutes on what we've talked about on this episode.
Yeah. I've given 2 TEDx talks on inclusion, and that was an awesome experience. How was the experience for you?
It's 6 months of anticipatory joy and dread. It's like, because you're working so much on crafting it, but when it was finally delivered, even live, I had such great response because even though I talk about the school situation, so many folks in the audience are like, "Hey, I can use this at work with my coworkers and things." So it's a universal message, just like what you're doing. It's this important message to get out there.
Yeah, that's great. Ready for the last question?
Hit it.
Do you like Spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
Yes.
Wow, that was very fast.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, but I don't eat much of it anymore. But
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, that was like, again, growing up in the 70s and 80s, man, that was like staple,
Yeah.
especially for our
So
family.
I've been asking every guest that question because I live near Austin, Minnesota, where they make spam and where the spam museum is located. So it's fun just to
Nice.
ask that and get the response. That might have been the fastest yes I've ever gotten, though. That was pretty fast.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm a true fan.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.